Welcome to On the Mark with Peter Buckley and Mark O'Donnell. Our podcast is dedicated to helping Christians target the right priorities in their apostolic and interior lives.
Well, hello and welcome to On the Mark. I'm Peter Buckley, your host, and joining me and us, for those of you listening, Mark O'Donnell. I want to welcome you, Mark, and thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
We are going to, over the next several episodes of On the Mark, focus on some elements of Catholic social teaching with a particular focus on a document that was published a couple different times. It first started in 2010, then 11, and then a more recent, I guess, updated version of it, which is called Vocation of a Business Leader, of Business Leaders, which is excellent document, not that long, but really rich and loaded with great material, particularly for Catholic professionals and how they might live their life more fully in their professional environment. Their faith more fully in a professional environment. That document was put out. It was inspired actually by an encyclical from Pope Benedict XVI, which was Caritas and Veritate, and then it was published by the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. So more on that as we go along. But we've taken a look at this here, Mark, and that's what we want to focus on today for the few minutes that we have you. There's a well-known phrase, I think it has its origin from Luke 12:48, which basically says, for whom much has been given, much is expected. Why is that such an important starting point for business leaders?
I think it is because business leaders are often entrusted with significant resources, capital, influence, people, technology, whether they create it or they use it. And when those gifts are used well, they can cure disease, create prosperity, bring people together. But when they're misused, they can also cause great harm. As we've seen in many business scandals, faith reminds us that responsibility grows with blessing.
I guess before we get too much into this, we maybe my fault, we should have defined a little more fully what is Catholic social teaching. So for somebody, perhaps is unfamiliar with, maybe aware of the term, but not necessarily aware of some of the doctrine or the teaching surrounding it, how do you explain its relevance to business?
Well, by Catholic social teaching, the Church teaches that business leaders who are guided by ethical social principles, exemplified through lives of virtue and illuminated for Christians by the gospel, that we can succeed and contribute to the common good. So obstacles to serving the common good come in many forms, corruption, the absence of the rule of law, greed, poor stewardship, and most importantly, living a divided life. So unity of life is key for business leader to live and promote in order to live Catholic social teaching. So I guess those are really the main elements of the teaching, and it's very rich and covers a lot of areas.
I guess some people would be surprised that the church has so much to say in this area. Why does the church care so much about business?
Well, because business has a big influence on the world, how money is used. I think it was Pope Francis in one of his documents. He says that we all have to admit that we bow down to the dominion of money. It was kind of a scary statement, but it's true. I mean, just look at the way rich people are paid deference, and the whole fundraising world, and what a circus that is, But businesses shape society. The family is the primary school of society, but businesses provide jobs, teach virtues, bring people together from different cultures and nations for a common purpose. So what happens in the workplace deeply affects human dignity, and that's why it's so important. I mean, people complain a lot about their lives. A lot of that has to do with their jobs.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I read if you read, lives of business leaders and CEOs and so forth, a lot of them will attribute a lot of their success to the discipline and the practices they learned while, these early menial jobs they had, as young, oftentimes as teenagers. So it's very true. It seems that, well, of course, family is the primary school of society, but business really can be a means to teach discipline and other virtues as well. I mean, just being honest, being hardworking and diligent, and so forth. You've in the past shared a story from your early banking career, uh, dealing with training you and I guess your entire class received as new hires. Maybe expound on that a little bit. What did that experience teach you?
Well, one of the things it taught me was you have to serve all sectors of society. And one of the sectors that the bank was serving, and we were in New York City, was the garment district. And the garment district is kind of notorious for its not, I wouldn't say unethical practices, but just its kind of street.
Casual.
Yeah,
We'll say
yeah,
euphemistically, casual practices.
yeah, casual practices.
Yeah.
But I mean, the bank
Off
would
the book.
offer, we would offer letters of credit, which basically meant we would guarantee the credit of the garment manufacturer so they could go out and buy raw materials abroad. And those people who were supplying those materials were going to be paid either by the garment manufacturer or by us, the bank. And I like that we would do that and backstop them so that they could then more easily buy product, make product. And then on the sales side, we would do factoring and would factor their receivables, which means that we would buy their receivables at a slight discount so that they would have cash so they could keep running their businesses or, get cash faster and they wouldn't be at the mercy of a customer who didn't pay them. They could sell the receivable to us. We could buy it. And so I thought those two things were really interesting because that's just a really tough business. And there are a lot
But
of
the
people.
interesting thing, though, and I think the point you had made to me was the bank was entrusting this, what I think is a pretty high level of responsibility, to you new hires.
Well, we would go into different, divisions in the bank once we completed training, and one of them handled that district. And so you would, you'd always have some supervision, but you're signing off on millions of dollars of letters
Hmm.
of credit to just basically from meeting some guy in a warehouse on 7th Avenue
Mm,
and him telling you, hey, I need to import, $10 million worth of silk from Vietnam or China or wherever, but they don't trust me, and looking at his bank statements, looking at his business and saying, well, we'll put our name on it and they know who we are. And so, yeah, you have a little bit more influence than you should have at the age of 25, but
hmm.
I think it was a good lesson, that it isn't just about the rich and famous who get loans. I mean, yeah, obviously they're going to get loans, but there are also people who are making the clothes that you're wearing right now.
Hmm. Hmm. Let me ask you this. So, and I guess there are many high level examples of this, but maybe from your understanding, what happens when leaders are not virtuous?
Well, I think the tone is set from the top in any organization, then it just flows down through all the employees to the different levels of leadership. But when a leader isn't virtuous, I mean, the damage is real. Expediency replaces justice. Power corrupts wisdom. Technology overrides dignity, and self-interest pushes aside the common good. Those are all themes from the document you cited earlier, but that's 100% what happens. I mean, I personally witnessed this because I was a VP of finance for a major publishing company, and my boss went around my back and told a subordinate of mine to book business that we had not delivered yet. And then senior management became aware of it. Um, and they wanted to fire me, and I didn't know anything about it. And then they went to my boss and he said, "Oh yeah, no, I told her to do that just because, we wanted to book the business so he could get his bonus, basically."
Hmm.
But the problem was the amount was about $400,000. So it was almost enough to trigger a restatement of earnings for the company.
Hmm.
You know, which
Publicly
is,
traded. It was publicly traded.
yeah, publicly
Yeah.
traded company. And so that's why they were so upset with me. And I was like, hey, I wish you know, I could be more diligent on my boss, but he just went around me probably because he knew I wouldn't do it. If he came to me, I wouldn't do it. But if he intimidated a subordinate, then they would do it and not think much of it, you know. Anyway, so that's just a small example, but it's a real example. I mean, we have all these different company scandals in the past of people who've cooked their books
I
and
think it's a good one because I mean, yeah, there are those that make the headlines on the Wall Street Journal, but this is, you know, a reasonably sized company, and these kind of things happen very frequently.
yeah.
You made a pretty striking comment to me the other day that businesses can collaborate with God in creation. What do you mean by that?
Well, at the beginning, when I first heard this idea, I didn't really give it a lot of credence, I guess. I guess I should have, but I'm like, well, God's the creator. I mean, we're just moving product around. But when I ran the wholesale bakery, I realized, hey, I'm making product here. And what am I making? I'm making food. And we were just a small outfit. Maybe we had 50 customers, did a little over 1 million in sales. But every night we'd send out the trucks and do the deliveries, and there were thousands of pieces of coffee cakes, muffins, scones, um, all sorts of different danishes, croissants. And we delivered them to hotels and to schools and to restaurants who didn't have baking capacity. And I realized, hey, we're creating something here. We're creating food and we're giving it to others. And it just gave me a sense of fulfillment that I didn't have in other jobs where you didn't have that tangible product that you're providing for society. So
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting from
Well,
that perspective.
and I think that also transitions into this whole idea of where we get dignity from the work that we do. That we want to change dignity through their employment, in part, right? And to that end, I think one of the most powerful examples you shared with me was you hired somebody. I think in most cases, this person would not have been accepted by other employers, and maybe why is that story so important?
Um, well, I actually didn't hire the person. I kind of what happened with the wholesale bakeries, I was consulting with them and they had like a fight within the family that owned it. And one of the guys running it left, and so the other member asked me to step in and run it.
Got
And
it.
so it had about 8 or 10 employees, and we had different drivers, and it's no big deal. I mean, one of the drivers was a level 3 sex offender. I didn't know that. No one really knew it, but he was also one of the best employees I had. Just to put that in context, the level 3 offense that he was convicted of, that occurred in 1988, and at the time we were working, it was 2005, so it was 17 years prior, and nothing had happened since 1988. So that gives you a little bit of a background on it. It wasn't like it happened the day before. I mean, when you drive a bakery truck, you're picking up product at 5 or 6 o'clock at night, and you're driving all night, and then you're delivering the truck back at 5 or 6 in the morning, and then you're going home and sleeping. And it's a grinding job. And this guy would always show up, whether it was rain, snow, sleet, and other drivers weren't like that. And when they didn't show up, then we had to go out and do the route. And that's, you can do that once or twice, but you're just going to collapse if you can.
Hmm.
But it just struck me how much this guy liked the job, how diligent he was, how grateful he was to have a job. I mean, because let's face it, if you're a level 3 sex offender, you know, no one's going to hire you.
Hmm.
They're not going to say that, but they'll just find a way that, oh my goodness, I don't want this guy around. But that showed me just how important your work is, and the dignity you can get from just doing your job and doing it well.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm sure in a certain sense it also restored a sense of purpose and dignity for him as well. Of course, it helped him and helped the business. You mentioned this idea of I guess two different ideas, or one idea expressed two different ways. servant leadership and then tyrannical leadership, right? What's the difference in real terms between these two?
Well, servant leadership just means that you lead by serving and the others see that. It's an interesting story. And another bakery, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was called LaValle Bread Distributors. Andy LaValle ran it. And I went to a talk that Andy gave one time. Andy was a holy, devout Catholic man, and he had a big business. And he was talking about servant leadership. And he said, when it snows, all the managers call up the drivers and they volunteer to take over their routes that night so they can go home and be with their families. I mean, that's servant leadership.
Yeah.
That's like, boom.
Yeah.
So it's not just a theory. But that was a great example, because I knew that, obviously I knew exactly what he was talking about and how hard that was. And I'm like, okay, that really sunk home. So that's a great company to work for.
Great example. And I knew Andy, and I can picture him saying that. Maybe just as we wrap it up here, Mark, what's your challenge to Catholic professionals listening today?
Well, just try to live a united life. I mean, this theme of unity of life is talked about a lot, but bringing your faith into the workplace doesn't mean that you hand out prayer cards to people. It just means that, you're honest, you treat them with dignity and respect, you're willing to do their job to show them that, it's not beneath you. And we'll talk more about this, but, your prayer life has to influence your work life. Your faith has to influence how you actually go about your daily duties. And, we didn't talk about tyrannical leadership, but, a lot of companies where I worked that were big and famous, they were very difficult places to work because they were very stressful. And that stress was imposed from the top onto the employees.
Let's leave a little suspense here, and we'll talk about that in our next episode. So
that sounds great. That's a great way to lead it off.
Thanks, Mark, for joining us today. That was excellent. Appreciate the insight, and we'll get back very shortly in the next episode of On the Mark.
Thanks for listening to On the Mark with Peter Buckley and Mark O'Donnell. If you enjoy our podcast, be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to be notified every time Peter and Mark release a new episode. And visit us on the web at onthemark.show.